they do what they did? What was their guiding principles? I started by going through the book of Acts and finding major decisions along the way, and there are some pivotal, important spots that appear. And after a little while, I said, after analyzing and structuring and all that, I said, I think I'm overworking this maybe a little bit. One thing that became clear to me, though, is that there is no set formula about decision making. It comes down to the basics of we are in an active relationship. We believe that through Jesus Christ you have an active relationship with God the Father. And it's hard to really quantify relationships. Today being Valentine's Day, and most of you out there have been married or had sweethearts, and it's really very difficult to give a step-by-step process or guarantee of how a relationship will work. I mean, if you were to say, well, if you call her every day, you bring her flowers and say sweet things, then certainly she'll fall in love with you. That's a guarantee. Yeah, right. Or you'll be arrested as a stalker, actually. There's no set way. What works in one relationship would not work in another. What's endearing in one relationship is probably grounds for divorce in another. It's that extreme. So, you don't have set rules about this. It's not a hard and fast, step-by-step thing. And yet, there are some principles. First you got to get to know each other, of course. To know what's going to please someone, you have to get to know them. And then you have to kind of act upon what you find out about it. But also there are some parameters of common sense and health. They have these dating sites, all these dating sites now where you're teamed up with compatibility. I can't imagine anyone saying, I found the perfect mate. They drink excessively, just like me. They're emotionally distant, and they can't hold out a job either. That's not going to go too far. You found somebody like that, Andrew? We'll pray for you later. So, how do we make decisions within the context of faith? Well, I want to look at one example first that kind of bears out, I think, a central principle. If you turn to Acts 6. No, I'm wrong. Acts 8. Acts chapter 8, 1705. 1705. Acts chapter 8, I'll be starting in 26. Acts chapter 8, 26. Philip in the Ethiopian. Now, Philip is one of the disciples, and he was traveling about, spreading the gospel. He had been in Samaria. And we pick up the story here. Now, an angel of the Lord said to Philip, go south to the road, the desert road, that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. Didn't say why, just said go. So he started out. And on his way, he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot, reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. Okay. Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. Do you understand what you are reading? Philip asked. How can I, he said. Sorry, I think I skipped something here. How can I, he said, unless someone explains it to me? So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. The the eunuch was reading the passage of Scripture, he was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before the shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. The eunuch asked Philip, "Tell me, please, who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else?" Then Philip began with that very passage of Scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. Now, it seems pretty straightforward. You know, I'm reading this, I'm thinking, the angel, the spirit, they were both pretty busy in directing Philip about where to go. You know, go south, go to that chariot. But why did he just say, okay, Philip, go talk to that Ethiopian eunuch and tell him about Christ right now? Wouldn't that be a little more straightforward? I mean, why the step by step and kind of putting things together? I would look at Acts 11, which is Peter in the house of Cornelius. You needn't turn there, but actually it's one of the, I find, more humorous passages of Scripture. You have Cornelius, who is a God-fearing Gentile, means someone who is worshiping the God of Israel but not converted yet. An angel comes to Cornelius during prayer and says, hey, send a couple guys to Simon the tanner's house and ask them to bring Peter. So he does that. Meanwhile, Peter is at Simon the tanner's house. He has a vision. There's a sheet that comes down from heaven. There's all sorts of animals on it. And a voice says, Simon Peter, take and eat anything you want. Well, Peter's a Jew and kosher law, and he says, oh no, Lord, I can't do that. I love it when people advise God. Probably thinking this is just a test. But God says, well, I have made clean, don't call it unclean. And he sees this vision and has this conversation 2 more times. So, while he's having this vision, these 2 guys come to the door and say, we were sent here to call Peter. Is there a Peter here? And that, well, yeah, he's up on the roof, I'll bring him down. So they eat together. Next day, the 2 guys bring him to Cornelius' house. And that's when it gets, I find, really humorous. Because Peter goes in and says, well, Cornelius, you brought me here. What do you want? Cornelius said, well, an angel told me to bring you here. What do you got?